Hello guys again. We're going to review in this video how I uh, normally approach what ranges I would like to raise first in. I will use poker snowy. Basically, this is a spot where you have to raise and you are not in the small line. You have a couple of players behind, so basically you cannot use pure solver because it's not a heads up spot. So when this happens, I think it's good to use Poker Snowy as the main tool just to have an idea. And then you also have to realize that Poker Snowy is not perfect. It's based in neural networks, blah blah blah, but it's not a perfect software, so it might change in the future. Preferred ranges are normally under the gun and middle are pretty standard for everyone. Cutoff is normally pretty standard. Button is people have been switching it all over the years. So we have a look on what I usually do. First of all is that the bigger you raise is this is a 10-20 table, for example, and imagine you're going to raise, let's go to the pre-flop advice, and you're going to raise to half pot, let's go better to range advice. You're going to raise, let's say, small, and you should be raising 17% of the hands, but if you're raising really big, you should be raising a smaller, tighter range. Why does this happen? Normally what happens is that the bigger you're raising, it's like the bigger you're 3-betting or the bigger you're doing the things, the lower amount that you can do. If we speak about optimal ranges, normally what it will happen is that you use different siphons that is really extremely hard to equilibrate and it's not going to give you so much EV, so we are not going to use it. You'd be limping, you'd be raising different siphons, and then you could use a higher VPIP. However, the amount of EV that this gives to you is not enough to try to do it because you have to split your range between many parts and your opponent is going to play pretty well against this. So my suggestion is just try to use an average siphon as everyone is doing and try to stick to the regular strategy. Normally you can raise it smaller if you think people are too tight. For example, you can raise something like 2.1 big blind, or you can just start raising something like 62, like 3.2 big blinds if you think that your opponents are extremely loose. So you will be playing a tighter range, of course, if you are raising bigger. When you're playing early position, you should be playing something around 15% of the hands, and if you're playing middle position, you will be playing something around 20% of the hands, let's say here, 20, 21. If you see the morphology of these ranges, Pistol is going to use mostly some pocket pairs, but not all, some suited connectors, but only the one suit, which will board coverage you, and then you will use many ace-x suited. So basically it's trying to give some setups with not flush draws and things like that. It's not going to use so many offsuit hands. Then when you arrive to the cutoff, you have less players behind and you can try to start exploiting the tendencies from your opponents. Then the big blind, for example, can be too tight, so instead of raising 25% average, you can raise something like 32, 30%, something like this. If you see again the pre-flop advice, you will see that the range still has a couple of offsuit hands, but not so many. It's never raising something like ace-5 or ace-4 offsuit, and it's raising most of the pocket pairs, but not all, so it's not considered so good, and all these things. The thing is that Poker Snow is not perfect, but probably it's going to be more accurate than you will be, so it's really hard to try to think that these ranges are good or bad, so you cannot, it's really hard to reason logically about what are the better hands to include, so the best way to go here, in my opinion, is just try to do what Poker Snow we do, because there is no other way to infer if pocket deuces is better than, for example, 10-7 suited or not. I normally raise around 25% of the hands, but if, for example, the button is too tight or the big blind is too tight, I'll be raising up to 30%, and if they are extremely loose, I can raise something like 23% or so. I usually try to be elastic, but not extremely elastic. Here I try to be, for example, very static early position and middle position, and I try to be kind of elastic on the bottom and extremely elastic on the small one. So it's something like, okay, I'll be raising different siphon, I'll be raising different ranges based on which position I am, and the elasticity is something that is going to evolve given I have less players to focus on, and also people will have more tendencies, more like clear tendencies. So once we follow the action on the cutoff is falling and we arrive to the bottom, bottom is really a position that has changed a lot all over the years. Like people used to raise something like 70% in the beginning, then it changed to something like 60, 55% in 2013, 2014, and then when Poker Snowy arrived, people started to raise something like 45%, 40%, and now people are going closer to the optimal, something like between 35 and 45%. If you go here to the range advice, you will see that it's around 40%, and if you're raising big, it's going to be 37%, and if you're raising small, 44%. So most of the times it's going to be really close what you should be raising. It's important to note that most of the times, even if you're raising big, you should be following some of the ace-X off, and then you should not be opening the offsuit connectors. This is some mistakes I usually see at many people, that they are just raising something like 9-8 off because, or 8-7 off because it looks well, or 6-5 off, or even ace-2 off or ace-3 off offsuit. So all these hands you have to be pretty careful. Is this a big mistake? No, definitely, but definitely as well, we try to play the better we can. It's a pretty easy spot, so if we have a very few clear rules, if we follow them, it's going to be good for us. So if we think, for example, that our opponents are extremely tight or something like this, we can go up to 50%, but it does not make sense that we go for, like, for example, like 70%, except if our opponent is going to commit really big mistakes post-flop, or he's like extremely tight, but it does not usually happen nowadays in mistakes. So can we play at a range? Yes, we can play something like 35% or something like this if we have very tough players in the blinds, or for example they are playing better than us. But normally the skill level has to be extremely different to make you fall more than the optimal range, because you are playing in position, so it's going to be easier for you to play well. And even if your opponent is a bit better, he's not going to be so much better, so he will outplay you all the time. The thing about the button is that if, for example, you are playing with ante, you should be open raising bigger, or you should be raising, for example, more often, and this is pretty clear. You can open up to, let's say, 55, 60%, depending on the sighting of the ante. Also, it will depend on how your opponents will react to this. Most people play right nowadays pretty well under really static conditions, like there is no ante, or the rules are the same as always, or the rake is the rake that they have been playing forever. But if, for example, they are playing without rake, probably they'll play too tight, or if they are playing with ante, they might play too tight. So you can consider raising smaller with a higher frequency, or you can consider raising to the same frequency, even also with a higher frequency, or you can raise the same amount but with a bigger sighting if you think that people are like they are adapting well. Also, the last thing I want to say is that in the future, and this is the first position that we will see, people will start using mixed strategies. They'll start racing to different sightings, they'll start limping, and I think it's a good strategy, but still it's not enough EV to implement it. You are going to be playing in position all the time, so it's better than if you do, for example, in the middle position, and also it's going to increase more your EV than it's going to do it, for example, at early position or middle position. However, I still think it's too early, so I'm not focused on this because it's not going to be a big difference, except if you are playing extremely tough lineups or things like this. And if you are playing lower stakes, or you are playing mid stakes, or even high stakes no splits, I just recommend to follow more straightforward strategy and try to focus on more important things. So racing first in is not it's something pretty easy. I think most people do it well. You just try to avoid like over racing on the bottom. You should try to adapt if you are playing with ante, or if you are playing with lower or higher rake. And then if you're playing early or middle position, and you're playing in a very like less developed environment, and everyone is calling with wider ranges, or they are not triveting you too much, then you can raise bigger sighting. Latest thing I remember now is that if your opponent is not triveting you enough, you can raise bigger, because he's not exploiting the fact that you are raising big. The best way to exploit an over raising is triveting more, and the best way to exploit the fact that you are raising too big as well is trying to 3-bet more. So if this is not happening, let's look at someone who is 3-betting, let's say 7%. Even if he's folding a lot, I tend to raise big because he's not going to exploit this, and you can use this kind of exploits to exploit them. And of course, if your opponent is 3-betting something like 16% or something like that, bottom versus big line, then what you can do is you can raise smaller with the same frequency, let's say 37%, and then you can do a lot of 4-bet, so you can exploit your opponent for doing this. Yeah, I think this is the way I usually approach. See you guys.